What if Zoro was the one who ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi? How different would the story of One Piece play out with a stretchy swordsman? Well, after Zoro's childhood friend, Kuina, died, he decided to take on their dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman. With a new sense of purpose and dedication, Zoro left the Ishin Dojo and decided to embark on an adventure around the world to find stronger swordsmen and defeat them. Upon reaching the outskirts of the town, he witnessed a group of bandits harassing some villagers. With his grief still fresh, Zoro did not hesitate for a moment and cut down the bandits. The villagers, grateful for his help, offered him a basket of fruit that the bandits had just stolen from them. He refused and helped himself by taking the food the bandits already had. Zoro noticed a peculiar fruit with swirls, but thought it to be an exotic fruit and didn't think much about it. Since Zoro was always focused on his training, he wasn't aware of the existence of devil fruits. It wasn't until some hours later that he realized, due to his lack of direction, that he had not made it much farther from the village yet. In his frustration, Zoro plopped down under a tree and took out the swirly fruit he took from the bandits. Fueled by hunger, Zoro took a bite of the fruit and almost gagged from the disgusting taste. Thinking it a waste to throw it away, Zoro stomached it and consumed the whole fruit, unaware of the changes it had already made in his body, and continued on his journey. During the 2 weeks that followed, Zoro realized something was wrong when his body began to feel different, stretching and contorting in ways that should be impossible. He concluded that it was because of the fruit he had consumed and was devastated. For a swordsman like Zoro, who values strength, discipline, and control, this new power felt like a curse. He tried rejecting the powers and resented them, thinking his stretchy constitution would become a hindrance to him becoming stronger, and refused to utilize them. He asked around for the strongest swordsman in the world, learned about Mihawk, and made it his goal to hunt him down and defeat him to fulfill his dream. He decided to become a pirate hunter in order to pursue Mihawk. He also came to know about devil fruits and finally understood what had happened to him. With time, Zoro grew in fame as he faced off against pirates and became stronger with each fight. Although initially despising the changes in his body due to the devil fruit, he came to learn to accept the powers and utilize them in a way that enhanced his swordsmanship. With his rubber body, he discovered ways to enhance his sword strikes, extending his reach and adding unorthodox flexibility to his attacks. He started developing and mastering his own rubber sword style in contrast to the original three-sword style. His wandering eventually led Zoro into conflict with Marines and pirates alike. It wasn't long before Zoro finally encountered Dracula Mihawk at the Barati restaurant and challenged him to a duel to the death. We all remember the initial iconic meeting between Mihawk and Zoro, but here's a twist this time. Mihawk is not only impressed by Zoro's skill in swordsmanship, but also by his mastery over his rubber body, making him an unpredictable and dangerous fighter. Where in the canon reality Zoro lost one-sidedly, what if Zoro actually put up a fight with the help of his devil fruit powers? Instead of defeat and a promise of rivalry, what if Mihawk saw even greater potential in Zoro and offered him a place by his side? This is where Mihawk not only acknowledges Zoro's determination, but also his skill, talent, and potential. Zoro, knowing that although he was not yet defeated, he would be if the fight continued, accepts Mihawk's proposition on the condition that Mihawk will train him and they will one day resume their duel to the death at Zoro's request. Mihawk accepts, and although not known to the world yet, a deadly and dangerous duo has already come into existence at this time. Following this, Mihawk assumes a mentor-like role for Zoro. They are no longer just rivals, but are now teacher and student, and eventually opponents. Zoro, with Mihawk, becomes a bounty hunter, traveling the seas and facing off against different opponents. With Zoro's unorthodox fighting style and Mihawk's expert swordsmanship, both of them soon gain a reputation as the most formidable bounty hunter duo in the world. Pirates fear them, and Marines are desperate to stop their reign of terror. In this reality, Luffy, while not possessing the Gomu Gomu no Mi, was still ambitious and determined to become the Pirate King. His journey without the same powers was filled with different perils. While not possessing the rubber devil fruit powers, Luffy was still trained to be strong by his grandfather and had mastered hand-to-hand combat and haki. Garp tried his best to convince Luffy to join the Marines. However, his freedom-loving nature made the pirate life more appealing to him. His crew would not be called the Straw Hats, as he never came to meet Shanks and would also be missing many of the core members we've come to love in the Straw Hat crew. However, some would still make their way in, like Sanji, Nami, Usopp, and Chopper. His crew would also not be as strong as it once was, since one of its key strong players, Zoro, is no longer part of the crew. Luffy would come across Zoro while he was pursuing him and his crew to hunt them down. When Luffy and Zoro finally cross paths in this timeline, it would be under very different circumstances than in the original. Zoro had already embarked on his path to becoming the strongest swordsman by embracing his role as a bounty hunter alongside Mihawk, and had long since abandoned any notion of joining a pirate crew. When they came face to face, Luffy was not just starting his pirate journey, but had already become one of the key players across the seas as a formidable pirate captain, while Zoro was a world-renowned bounty hunter with a reputation for capturing some of the strongest pirates in the world. Their clash would be intense, with Zoro using his rubber abilities combined with his swordsmanship. He would take advantage of his rubber physique to speed up his attacks and dodge effectively, while Luffy would fight back using his own fighting techniques and haki, which he mastered through sheer will and determination. This fight emphasizes the reality of a friendship that was never realized due to their divergent paths. Because of Zoro's rubbery constitution, it was much easier for him to attack from a distance, as he wasn't required to come close to his opponent. Luffy, however, was a hand-to-hand combatant and needed to close the distance. As the battle progressed, it became more apparent that Luffy was slowly being worn out, with Zoro taking advantage of his reach and flexibility, relentlessly attacking. But Luffy was not one to back down and refused to give up. With pure will and determination, he kept retaliating with stronger blows enhanced by haki, refusing to show any gap in his defenses. This surprised Zoro, who was also forced to push beyond his limits to compete with Luffy's burst of determination and strength. This fight marked the first time Zoro would use haki in a battle. However, their showdown didn't last much longer, as Mihawk interfered, swinging his sword and sending Luffy flying into the distance, where he fainted. When asked why he interfered, Mihawk told Zoro about Garp's request to hand Luffy over to him alive. Although Luffy already had a bounty on his head, Garp specifically asked Mihawk, one of the Shichibukai, to capture Luffy alive and hand him over. Mihawk entrusted the unconscious Luffy to Zoro and asked him to hand him over to Garp and then come to Marineford, as Portgas D. Ace, the son of Gol D. Roger, was about to be executed. Zoro did not care much about the execution itself, but the possibility of facing stronger opponents interested him, as he would get to further test his strength. When Zoro was about to leave with Luffy, Sanji, the current second in command of Luffy's crew, tried to interfere and protect his captain. However, his attacks were blocked by Zoro. As quickly as one showdown ended, another began between Sanji and Zoro. In the original timeline, the rivalry between Zoro and Sanji is iconic, but this rivalry would take a darker turn in this universe. Sanji, known for his speed, precision, and devastating kicks, was a dangerous opponent for an already exhausted Zoro. Sanji was faster, but Zoro managed to keep his distance and counterattack. The fight became a flurry of swords, rubbery limbs, and aerial kicks. Eventually, both fighters grew tired but were determined to land the final attack. Zoro channeled his haki into his swords, focusing on a definitive strike to end the fight. Meanwhile, Sanji drew on his strength to perform a blazing attack, Flame Dance Kick, which ignited the air around his legs. The two attacks collided in a spectacular explosion, creating a shockwave. As the dust settled, Sanji was on the ground, and Zoro stood over him with a sword pointed at his neck, telling him to give up. Sanji smirked and pointed out that he had already won, as his crewmates had rescued their captain while Zoro was distracted. Surprised, Zoro looked back to see Usopp and Nami running off in the distance with an unconscious Luffy. Zoro proceeded to follow them, but Sanji stopped him and tried to kick him. Zoro dodged, and as Sanji found his footing, he made sure not to let Zoro pursue his captain or defeat him. Impressed by Sanji's determination, Zoro humored him and resumed the fight. The fight didn't last long, as Zoro unleashed Gear 2 and warmed up his rubbery body to increase his speed. This resulted in Sanji's defeat, and he was caught by Zoro. Seeing that Luffy had already escaped, Zoro decided to capture Sanji to collect his bounty and set off for Marineford to inform Mihawk of the developments. However, due to Zoro's navigational disability, it took him much longer to reach Marineford than it would have for anyone else. As a result, he arrived during the peak of the chaos. By the time Zoro arrived at Marineford, Whitebeard's forces were already clashing with the Marines in an attempt to save Ace. Amid the turmoil, Trafalgar Law made an appearance with his crew. Zoro observed Law's sword and his use of the Room ability against opponents and was intrigued. He told Trafalgar about his dream to become the strongest swordsman and challenged him to a duel. Mihawk, already engaged on the battlefield, quickly noticed Zoro and Law together and approached them to assist Zoro in capturing Law. Trafalgar Law utilizes his Ope Ope no Mi powers and uses his ability room in order to tactfully utilize his environment and teleport himself and others to gain a positional advantage. Initially, he decides to keep Zoro and Mihawk at a distance and disarms Zoro using shambles to teleport his swords away. He launches debris towards Mihawk in order to distract him and tries to use his mastery over space to give himself an edge. However, Mihawk does not fall for Law's spatial tricks. With unparalleled swordsmanship and observational haki, Mihawk begins slicing through the debris with precision. He easily cuts down everything Law sends his way. In the meantime, Zoro uses his rubbery limbs in order to retrieve his swords and tries to catch up with Mihawk. As the fight progresses, Zoro develops a deeper understanding of Law's powers and becomes accustomed to them. He starts to engage with Law head-on by stretching his limbs and engaging in long-range sword attacks. He tries to catch Law off guard with his flexibility and unpredictable movements. To counter, Law uses the tact ability in order to hurl massive pieces of debris at him, which Mihawk easily cuts through again. Zoro unleashes his Gear 3 in order to make his attacks faster and more aggressive. Zoro leaps into the air with his rubber body and starts spinning with his swords sticking out in a whirlwind motion. This attack unleashes a massive destructive force. With the progression of the fight, Law realizes that he is outmatched by both Zoro and Mihawk as opponents, so he makes a desperate attack called Gamma Knife in order to inflict injuries on Mihawk and Zoro's internal organs. However, Mihawk sees the attack coming due to his observational haki and easily avoids it. As Law is running out of options, he tries to flee and regroup with his crew, but Mihawk notices and deals a decisive blow. In one swift motion, a hockey-infused slash of Yoru cuts through the remnants of Law's room ability, breaking the spatial manipulation. Zoro, taking advantage of the situation, launches a slash of his own, aiming for his chest, but moving his rubbery arm to change the trajectory to his back at the last moment in order to confuse Law. Defeated, Law falls down on the ground unconscious, and Marine soldiers hurry to retrieve his body before his crew can get to him. The bounty hunter has just caught one of the most notorious pirates of the worst generation, and has effectively tilted the balance of power at Marineford in the world government's favor. Meanwhile, other battles are taking place across the island. Luffy found his way onto Marineford after hearing about Ace's capture. However, much to their dismay, Ace perishes, and so does Whitebeard. As in the original timeline, Blackbeard makes an appearance and steals Whitebeard's devil fruit. Zoro tries to combat Blackbeard, but is flung away by Blackbeard's shadow instantly. Mihawk tries to counter. However, Blackbeard instantly unleashes an earthquake, which causes him to lose his footing and jump backward. The Summit War, as it came to be called, concluded with Ace's death. Meanwhile, a heavily injured Luffy was rescued by Trafalgar Law's crew. They had also tried to retrieve their captain, but were unable to do so. After the end of the Summit War, the world is in disarray. Whitebeard, one of the 4 emperors of the sea, has fallen, and his crew is now scattered across the sea. The world government is desperate to capture the key figures from Whitebeard's crew in order to cement their victory and prevent any chances of a resurgence. Among these, Marco the Phoenix is at the top of the list. Marco is the possessor of a mythical zone-type fruit, Tori Tori no Mi, which allows him to heal from virtually any attack. This makes him a difficult target. Zoro and Mihawk aggressively pursue Marco in order to capture him. Their hunt leads them to an island in the New World where Marco and a few other Whitebeard pirates have taken refuge. Zoro and Mihawk quickly locate Marco after arriving on the island and pursue him. Marco, accompanied by some other Whitebeard pirates, tells them to run away and remains back to act as bait so that neither of them goes after the other Whitebeards. As Marco is able to heal fatal wounds and has high mobility due to flight, he proves to be a very tricky opponent for both Mihawk and Zoro. Marco starts the fight by using his incredible speed and flight in order to launch aerial attacks. He soars into the sky and shoots towards Zoro and Mihawk in order to send flaming kicks towards them. Zoro slashes at him, utilizing his own flexibility. However, Marco easily heals them and remains undeterred. Marco has been aiming to wear both Zoro and Mihawk down quickly, hoping to outlast them. Zoro uses his own rubber-enhanced abilities and launches himself into the air in order to close the distance between himself and Marco. Zoro sends shockwaves of air slashes towards Marco, forcing him to dodge mid-air. Zoro uses Gear 2 in order to boost his speed to keep up with Marco's movements. Zoro's elastic body allows him to contort in ways that give him an advantage in close combat with Marco. However, Marco's regenerative powers make it difficult for him to land a decisive blow. Each time Zoro's sword slashes through Marco, the wounds are quickly engulfed in blue flames and heal almost instantly. Mihawk, in the meantime, is biding his time and watching the fight in order to time his attacks to target Marco's wings and limit his mobility. His approach is methodical, as he knows brute force would not help against Marco's regenerative abilities. Using his observation haki, Mihawk tracks Marco's movements, ensuring that when he strikes, it's with maximum efficiency. Zoro unlocks Gear 3 in order to enlarge his limbs and make his sword attacks heavier. The weight of his attacks forces Marco into a defensive position as he is momentarily overwhelmed by the force of Zoro's attacks. Zoro quickly realizes that conventional attacks are futile, and if he drags this on, they will eventually lose. Mihawk, who is still observing the fight before deciding to step in, imbues his sword, Yoru, with advanced armament haki and slashes at Marco's wing the moment he catches a glimpse of an opening. Mihawk's strike connects and severs one of Marco's wings, leaving him vulnerable to another strike. Before Marco can recover from the shock of being slashed, Mihawk swings his sword again for another fatal strike towards his chest. The strike connects, causing Marco to fall to the ground. Marco is quickly incapacitated, and being unable to heal fast enough, he is finally captured by Mihawk and Zoro. Marco's capture symbolizes the end of the Whitebeard pirates. During his fight with Marco, Zoro realizes that he is still far off from being truly strong. He realizes that without Mihawk, he would have never been able to defeat Marco with his current strength. The most he contributed was to serve as a distraction until Mihawk had dealt with him. He asks Mihawk to toughen up his training even further. Mihawk accepts, and they both journey to Kuraigana Island, where Zoro trains for the next few years. Zoro learns mastery over observation haki and how to better utilize his rubber constitution. He explores the gears and masters the different forms he could achieve. For 2 years, Zoro relentlessly trains under Mihawk's tutelage and later resumes bounty hunting in order to test his current strength. Zoro and Mihawk get a tip regarding some of the worst generation pirate captains gathering in the Sabaudi archipelago. They make their way to the island after hearing about the large gathering of rookie pirates. The atmosphere at the island is chaotic when they arrive, as pirates gather in order to enter the new world. Zoro finds Eustace Kid, one of the highest bounty targets within the worst generation, gathering powerful fighters for his crew. He doesn't hesitate, unsheathes his sword, and slashes at him from a distance. Kid senses the attack and uses his ability to manipulate metal to counter and dodge immediately. Kid uses his powers to manipulate the metals around him and pull parts, such as weapons weapons, ships, and debris toward himself. He then turns them into massive constructs on his arm. His giant metal arms swing toward Mihawk and Zoro as Kid begins to launch heavy attacks at them. Mihawk calmly deflects the metal attacks with easy precision and sidesteps the others. His sword, Yoru, slashes through the magnetic constructs with little effort, and his observation Haki allows him to predict Kid's moves before they occur. Zoro utilizes his rubbery body to dodge and weave around the battlefield while sneaking attacks in through gaps in Kid's attacks. Kid starts focusing his attacks on Zoro to deter him from his attacks. However, having mastered observation Haki under Mihawk, Zoro can also foresee the attacks and easily dodges them. By enlarging his arms, Zoro rips through the metal constructs to create an opening for him to get close enough to slash Kid. He's successful in doing so. However, the slash is much more shallow than expected as Kid dodges at the last moment. Enraged, Kid pulls entire ships towards Zoro and Mihawk, trying to overwhelm them. On top of those ships, Kid creates two big mechanical arms in order to crush them. Mihawk passively watches as he looks at Zoro to see what he would do. Zoro closes his eyes and sheathes his sword. He focuses his Haki and unsheathes the sword, unleashing a slash strong enough to rip the ships and Kid's mechanical arms cleanly in two. As Kid desperately prepares for a final attack, Zoro activates Gear 4 and boosts his speed and power. He launches a high-speed, Haki-infused sword attack by creating multiple projections of himself and delivering powerful, clean cuts to Kid's metallic defenses. The attack shatters Kid's defenses and leaves him vulnerable for a final decisive attack. Mihawk follows up with a powerful slash that knocks Kid unconscious. The duo had successfully captured another pirate captain from the worst generation. Although their crew tried their best to protect their captain, they were easily subdued by Zoro and Mihawk and were of little match against them. By now, Zoro and Mihawk have earned themselves an even bigger name than before, with successful bounties of Trafalgar Law, Eustace Kid, and even Marco the Phoenix under their belt. The Zoro in this current timeline has become more hardened and battle-worn than the one we're familiar with. He's far more solitary, with his world dominated by the pursuit of strength and the determination to fulfill his friend's promise. Over the years, the relationship between Mihawk and Zoro has evolved. Despite their mentor-student relationship, Zoro knows that in order to honor his promise to Quina and fulfill his own destiny, he must defeat Mihawk in a true duel. As promised years before, Zoro asked Mihawk for a duel to the death, and he accepts. Mihawk leads Zoro to a deserted island, far from any interference. There, Zoro sees another person waiting. It is Shanks, one of the emperors. Mihawk tells Zoro that he had asked Shanks to be here as a witness to their duel. The ground is flat and grassless, the wind is howling, and the sounds of ocean waves crashing against the cliffs can be heard. The sky is clear and sunny. Both Zoro and Mihawk silently watch each other, waiting for one to make the first move. The air cackles as Zoro and Mihawk dash toward each other in a blur of speed, and their swords clash with an earth-shattering impact. Mihawk uses Haki to try and suppress Zoro, but Zoro stands firm as he glares back. Mihawk's observation. Haki makes it difficult for Zoro to land a clean hit, but he uses his elastic body and begins to stretch and contort in unpredictable ways to make it harder to dodge his slashes. Mihawk's calm demeanor never falters as he dodges and parries Zoro's attacks. Mihawk uses Yoru to parry Zoro's wild rubbery sword strikes. Each slash of Mihawk's blade is graceful yet deadly, cutting through the air and making it difficult for Zoro to keep up. Zoro, however, refuses to be outdone. He unleashes Gear 2 and Gear 3 to give his attacks more speed and strength at appropriate moments during the fight. He extends his limbs mid-strike, allowing him to launch unexpected attacks from different angles. Zoro's relentless attacks push Mihawk back, but he remains calm and composed. As the battle rages on, Zoro, driven by his ambition and memory of Quina, digs deep and unleashes a slash infused with armament Haki. Mihawk is momentarily surprised as he blocks it with Yoru, infused with armament Haki as well. Sensing the burst of growth in Zoro through ambition alone, Mihawk unleashes his Conqueror's Haki to subdue Zoro. However, he resists and through sheer will releases a Conqueror's Haki of his own. This both surprises and excites Mihawk as he finally decides to stop holding back. Mihawk coats Yoru in advanced armament Haki, making his attacks become even more devastating. Each strike is imbued with such force that it cuts through the very air itself, leaving deep gashes in the ground as Zoro barely dodges them. Zoro quickly realizes the gap in the mastery of Haki and begins to push himself harder. He unleashes Gear 4 to increase the power of his strikes. His strikes become strong enough to shake the whole island. However, it still isn't very effective against Mihawk. Not long after, Mihawk delivers a fatal blow across Zoro's chest, sending him crashing onto the ground. Zoro's body trembles as he struggles to get up, blood pouring out of his wounds. Mihawk stands over him and looks down in disappointment. He says he expected more out of him since Zoro had suddenly asked for the duel. As he gets ready to deliver the finishing blow, something within Zoro changes. In this near-death moment, Zoro taps into his memories of Quina and refuses to let her dream die with him. He taps into the full potential of his devil fruit, whose true nature is the Hito Hito no Mi model. Nika devil fruit, Mihawk starts hearing drumming, and before he can deliver the blow, he quickly dodges back as a white-haired Zoro slashes into the space he was in just now. Laughter seeps from Zoro's mouth as he slowly gets up, and the ground beneath him begins to contrast and change, becoming rubbery in nature. Zoro has awakened his devil fruit and unlocked Gear 5. His rubber body no longer obeys the normal laws of physics. His movements become more exaggerated, almost cartoonish, but with an overwhelming sense of fluidity and unpredictability. With this newfound power, Zoro stretches his body in impossible ways, defying logic and gravity as he attacks Mihawk from every direction. His sword moves with such speed and power that Mihawk, for the first time in this battle, is forced to be on the defensive. Zoro's attacks are a mix of Nika's playful, unpredictable nature and the deadly precision of Zoro's swordsmanship. Mihawk, although cornered, smiles for the first time during the battle. Despite the gravity of his own situation, Mihawk admits Zoro's growth and acknowledges the fact that his protege has finally reached the pinnacle of his potential. As the battle progressed, the more worn out Mihawk got. Zoro's relentless attacks showed no sign of stopping. As Zoro is getting ready to deal the killing blow, Shanks, who had been watching the fight from the shadows, unable to interfere out of respect for Mihawk's wishes, steps forward when he realizes the duel is about to end in Mihawk's death. He asks Zoro to hold off the conclusion of his duel for later, as he can't see his friend die in front of him, and Mihawk still has much to accomplish. However, his heightened state of newfound power and the possibility of finally achieving his dream blinded him. Ignoring Shanks' warning, Zoro unleashes a hockey-infused slash that goes past Shanks' defenses and lands on Mihawk. Shanks watches, stunned, as his friend and longtime rival succumbs to his wounds and collapses onto the ground. His face darkens as the weight of the moment sinks in. His rival had been killed by the very man he had trained. He began to exude a crushing pressure of haki that caused the ground to crack. Zoro, with joyful laughter, counters with his own haki, causing his surroundings to contort in cartoonish ways. Without another word, Shanks lunges at Zoro with blinding speed. He swings his sword, Gryphon, with a deadly arc. Zoro manages to block the incoming attacks, but the sheer force sends him skidding back. The two swordsmen clash with incredible force, their attacks sending shockwaves across the island. Their haki clashing with each other causes the air to crackle. As the duel rages on, Zoro begins to realize the gravity of his situation. He can feel the Gear 5 wearing off, and he's already exhausted from his fight prior to this. With time, Zoro slowly starts going on the defensive. With a powerful swing, Shanks breaks through Zoro's defense, sending him crashing to the ground. Zoro, battered and bloodied, struggles to rise. As the Gear 5 slowly wears off, Zoro's body begins nearing its breaking point. Knowing that the end is near, Zoro refuses to surrender. He grips his swords tighter, and despite the pain racking his body, he readies himself for one final strike. The vow he made to Quina flashes in his mind. He channels all of his remaining energy and combines the last of his Gear 5 power with his rubber sword style in order to create a devastating attack. The air hums with power as Zoro rushes towards Shanks with the full brunt of his attack. But Shanks calmly meets Zoro's attack and with a single swing cuts through it with devastating force. The clash of haki sends a shockwave that splits the earth beneath him. Zoro stands frozen as he coughs out blood and eventually topples over onto the ground. His eyes filled with acceptance look at Shanks above him one last time before he closes them forever. However, in the next instant, an injured Mihawk grabs Shanks' arm and stops the chaos as the three pirates look at each other with silence. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button for more One Piece videos.